Hi everyone, it's me Lois with Aussie Lozzie Knit Designs, and this is Knit Bits. I'm really excited because if you've been bearing with me over the last few weeks, we've been talking about a knitting pattern and all the different components. And I don't know, I feel like we've hit a milestone today because we're actually going to be talking about pattern instructions. And so there's so much that goes into a pattern before we even get to the instructions. And now we're finally here. So the instructions, of course, are pretty straightforward. It's going to tell you how to knit that pattern. It's usually broken down into different components, cast on, and then sometimes, like I'm wearing a hat today, so I'm thinking hats, but the brim, and then like the main part of the hat, crown shaping or decreasing, bind off, closing, and then finishing. So those are the different sections that a pattern can be broken into. It can be broken into more, right? If you're doing like a sweater, you might have a set of instructions for the sleeves that is separate from, the body, the front or the back, or however that pattern is written. And so I think pattern writers, myself included, what we try to do is put them in logical categories so that when you're reading the pattern, you can identify like, oh, okay, this is how that brim is going to look like the picture. That way, when you're knitting, you can see, is what I'm making matching up with the finished object that the designer got, okay? So that's one thing. So the second thing is I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on each of the components, very little, but just to give you some information. So the cast on is not always specified in a knitting pattern. And in fact, I could just say cast on, 32 stitches or something like that. If it says something like that, you are free to choose whatever kind of cast on it is that you want to use. And I recommend when you're a beginner that you get one that's your favorite, like an old standby. And then once you're comfortable, begin learning new cast on methods because some of them can be adding decoration to your knit item, some of them can be functional as well as pretty. And so learning more and more cast on methods allows you to then begin looking at a knit pattern and saying, okay, this is a 1x1 rib. What kind of cast on can I do so that my cast on edge looks invisible if you don't want it visible? Or what kind of cast on can I do to make it really stand out? Those are things that you can decide as an end knitter. So it's actually not a terrible thing if the cast on instructions are not specified. It just may feel that way if you're new. Another thing that cast on instructions might say is do a stretchy cast on. And so you can Google that and just find some stretchy cast ons. Everyone always says that the long tail is a stretchy cast on, and I don't find that to be true. So I don't know how people are making their long tail cast on stretchy. Mine is usually pretty the size that it is. But it's just an example of, each knitter finding their own way of knitting and casting on. And so maybe for some people, the long tail cast on is stretchy, not my experience. That's okay. Then I can pick a different stretchy cast on, right? And that's why I encourage you to begin gathering different cast on methods into your tool belt so that you can make those decisions for yourself as you know your own knitting better than anyone else. All right, so then most of the other instructions are pretty straightforward. Like I said, they'll be in buckets, right? And then it'll have bind off. People don't usually specify a bind off either. It'll just say bind off all the stitches or something like that. That's fine. And you can use whatever bind off method you use. I almost always use the basic bind off method unless it says stretchy, and then I'll use something else. Or if I want a stretchy edge because I know I'm going to be pulling like say a cowl over my head and I don't want that to be like tight or anything when it's coming over my head. So those are just some things that you can do. The finishing instructions are also part of the instructions in the pattern. And so we'll get into some more of the finishing elements in another video. One other thing I wanted to mention though is in the pattern itself, if the designer has called out specific stitch patterns, like let's say diamond puff, then what they may do in the instruction section is say something like, work 4 rows of diamond puff. And so what you would have to do then is 4 rows was a terrible example. You don't need to comment that, I know that. But if it says that, then you would go up to the techniques and glossary and see the instructions for how to make that particular stitch pattern there. Okay, and then you would just implement that into the pattern that you're making. So I had a pattern that is the 2-color linen stitch. I have it, not had. And so it is a 4 row 2-stitch repeat. And so the way that my pattern worked is I described how to do that 2-color linen stitch in the techniques and glossary. And then in the instruction portion of my instructions, I just gave them how to set it up and then to do the linen stitch for an inch or 2. I can't remember. It doesn't matter, because the point is that you don't have to have those instructions repeated in 2 places. And so if it just says like linen stitch, you don't have to go Googling, just go up and look in your glossary and techniques. The information that you need should be in that pattern. All right, thank you so much. And if you enjoyed this video, would you please hit like, share, and subscribe.